Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of the Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society and the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed is native to Omaha. He has an undergraduate degree in art history and sociology from Lindenwood College in St. Charles, Missouri. He lived in Boston for 11 years and was a freelance architectural historian. While in Boston, he received a PhD at Boston University in architectural history. In 1985, he returned to Nebraska and became, and still is, the City of Lincoln Historic Preservation Planner. Ed is going to talk today about the 27th Annual Awards for the Preservation Association of Lincoln. And the title is And the Winner Is. Please join me in welcoming Ed Zimmer.
Glad to see you all. This will be our 27th annual award ceremony, and we had the actual presentation at PAL's annual meeting. PAL always tries to select a venue for its annual meeting, and we held this back a couple months ago. That's in an historic building, either recently rehabbed, experiencing rehab, or sometimes even a threatened building that needs the gift of attention of the annual meeting. And this year we were happy to return to what was built in the mid-1880s as the Hargrave Wholesale Grocery Company, better known for its 20th century occupant, Schwarz Paper Company, what we call now the Schwarz Building. That's being rehabbed into condominium apartments on the upper floors, and on the ground floor, commercial space. The commercial space is about to be put back into use, and through the kindness of Craig Geese and the owners of the building, PAL was able to meet there in that first floor space just before it transforms yet again. And it creates a really interesting and pleasant venue for the annual meeting event. Gave us a place for PAL President Jamie Tallman to present his annual report, and Gordon Scholes to give his treasurer's report, our steadfast treasurer for so many years, and then the report of the auditing committee of the board saying Gordon does great work, and he has continued to be the very steady and faithful treasurer for PAL. PAL's awards program honors recipients in several categories, and this year included several of the great heroes of Lincoln Historic Preservation who died last year, and began the awards with the Stewardship Award honoring Tim Francis, one of the true heroes of historic preservation in Lincoln, and was honored in the stewardship category because Tim was not about one building or one project, but really creating again a vibrant neighborhood around his own house at 25th and T Streets. Tim's own house was a beautiful little cottage bungalow at 2511 T Street, but he also encouraged landscaping around the neighborhood, rehabilitation of a whole variety of the historic houses. This beautiful little house, Queen Anne Cottage on T Street. The neighborhood has American Foursquares that have recently been rehabbed. The bungalow that Tim picked out for me and suggested I buy months after I arrived in Lincoln in 1985. Didn't work out for my family, but others have rehabbed this handsome bungalow with a stone front porch. And look at that planting between the curb and sidewalk. This neighborhood not only has been revitalized in terms of the houses and their own yards, but really that spirit has spilled out into the whole atmosphere of this Hawley neighborhood between approximately R and Vine Streets, 24th and 27th. And now there's even what's called the Hawley Hamlet, where a number of the families in the blocks between T and U Streets, 24th and 25th, or 25th and 26th, have joined their properties together, planting the curb curb zone, the backyards, the alleys, and producing a lot of wonderful local food in those spaces that they're sharing together. Tim's not the only catalyst for this neighborhood, but really was a key early supporter and promoter in his work first for human service agencies and then in his work as a realtor and basically as a great neighbor and volunteer for organizations like NeighborWorks. So Pal honored in absentia our great friend Tim Francis, for the Stewardship Award in this Hawley neighborhood. His friend Pat Anderson Sventes received the award, and I regretfully couldn't make the photograph I had of her receiving the award open into my program, but I handed Pat the award, and she promised it would be displayed proudly at the NeighborWorks headquarters in the Hawley neighborhood. Second of those fallen heroes in the last year was Jim CARUSO, and Jim also had contributed over really a career of public service in Lincoln in the Urban Development Department and was a key figure in several of the major projects that now I think we just accept and assume are part of our urban environment, but they were anything but easy projects, and Jim's creativity and financial acumen and just spirit helped make these projects reality. First of those was the first large-scale housing project undertaken in Haymarket, and that was what we call the Hardy Building, but originally constructed for Western Glass and Paint Company. This was Thomas P. Kennard's company in the early years. It was a 3-story building as first built, and then in 1917, and then 3 more stories were added on top in sort of a layer cake effect. And Hardy Furniture operated out of this building as a warehouse. They had their sales building in the 1300 block of O Street, but this was the Hardy, sometimes called Tilton Furniture Company operation down in Haymarket. During World War II, the building was converted to one of the war materials production buildings. Lincoln had several of those. This was a building in which Western Electric produced signal gear. After the war, the building had been painted. The paint was peeling off in great sheets. Those sheets were full of asbestos in the paint of this building, and it wasn't occupied. Very brave group of Haymarket volunteers, the Lincoln Haymarket Housing Corporation, working jointly with City Urban Development Department and Jim CARUSO, helping put together this whole complex deal, produced the first large housing project in Haymarket. Turned out that asbestos, to be taken off the building, had to you had to put a big plastic bag over the building or wrap it in plastic, and this is how the building looked when it was being stripped of the asbestos paint. And then the building was handsomely repainted, new windows, new apartments, 60 apartment units installed, many of them at an affordable housing rate, and a number of the units designed from the beginning to be fully accessible to people with mobility impairments, and that became a really key component of the Lincoln Haymarket housing market, and I think a great service to our city as a whole. In 1993, there was a project at the other end of Haymarket that CARUSO was a key catalyst, along with the same Lincoln Haymarket Housing Corporation, and that was the Grainger grocery warehouse building at 8th and O, 1912 building designed by Ferdinand Fisk, very handsome warehouse building, used for years by that grocery wholesale company, with truck docks on the south end, railroad spur and loading dock on the east side. By the 1980s, the building was largely out of use. It was in tired condition, was really in need of both a new use and a fresh rehabilitation. The signs that graced the building had largely fallen off, except for 2 elements on the east side that read Whole Fruits, which sounds like another company in Lincoln, but I don't think they're exactly the same one. And it became 39 apartment units for low-income individuals, again with a very sizable accessibility component in the design of the units and the building. With that loading dock on the east side, a simple addition to the north end of it could create a accessibility ramp and stairs very naturally within the design of the building. And Grainger came into place in the early 90s as another key component of housing and housing meeting multiple community needs in the Haymarket area. And the final project I'm going to highlight of Jim's long career in urban development in Lincoln was a very complicated project to take the largely unused President and Ambassador apartments sitting at 14th and Lincoln Mall or 14th and J, immediately opposite the Capitol and the beautiful Lincoln statue at the Capitol, and putting these back into full use. Owners were a coalition of church groups targeting affordable housing and low-income housing, and that use in this key part of downtown serves both the residents, also tells us that historic preservation isn't just about taking warehouses and turning them into high-end condominiums, but also meeting a whole range of housing needs in the neighborhoods and in the urban core of the city. These buildings of the late 1920s are on the National Register of Historic Preservation. In Jim's original project, it was supported with the federal income tax credits. The project has again been renewed in more recent years with city TIF support, and these units are in very fine condition, contributing to the housing needs of Lincoln and also to the environment of the Capitol. Favorite part of this project, facing immediately on the Capitol Square, and not able to be accomplished in the first rehab, but rather in the second, was restoring the primary entrance on the east side, which had had a canopy and a neon sign reading President right over the doorway, and those were restored in that second project, giving that face the emphasis it warranted. So we were very happy to honor Jim CARUSO for a very significant career in public service and housing service in Lincoln, and further honored that two of his beautiful and handsome children, Amy CARUSO and JP CARUSO, came to our event and received the award directly from PAL President Jamie Tolman. PAL isn't about just historic buildings and the special people who keep them viable with us, but also about places. And this year the award for an integration of an old and new went to a piece of park property and a project in the tail end of Antelope Park, right where it almost reaches Sheridan Boulevard. In the 1930s, when employment was so difficult, there were programs not only for laborers and artists, or laborers, writers, historians, but also artists, and a sculptor named Ellis Berman was doing several projects in Lincoln. He gave us Rebecca at the Well in Sunken Garden, now replaced by a bronze replica. Four Wars Memorial in Antelope Park by the Bandshell, Red Cloud or Smoke Signal out at Pioneers Park, and maybe the least recognized of Berman's works for us, the Pioneer Woman there in Antelope Park on South 33rd, almost down to Sheridan Boulevard. This is an old postcard view of Pioneer Woman with that gazebo standing behind her in this beautiful planting. Didn't look that way, wasn't quite as lovely a few years ago. Most of the setting had been lost, gazebo was lost, the statue was still there and being cared for, but that whole setting that really integrated it into the park had been worn out, taken down, and was no longer enriching the neighborhood and the city. This project not only rebuilt an interpretation of that gazebo in a beautiful arched form behind the statue, assured that the statue was in great condition again, but also, through a project of the Parks Department and volunteers, planted a whole sensory garden around Pioneer Woman. These aren't small projects. They're not just a few plants. They're not just a few volunteers, but really a wonderful, massive community effort to put together this kind of restored facility and renewed and reinterpreted facility in our city. So Pioneer Woman again has a very lovely, appropriate setting. Exciting to see not only for the historic element, but for the very sensitive new interpretation, and for the spectacular garden planted around it, which is not only enjoyed by people, but other residents of our city, as it should be. So the sensory garden delights our senses and the senses of other critters as well, and gives us this lovely new setting. So PAL recognized for integration of old and new, and I think of creative recognition by PAL of this park project, creating the Pioneer Woman Sensory Garden, and recognized the Parks Department. And J.J. Yost from Parks visited with us and received the award. And we also received all these wonderful photos from the very talented Mark Canny, who is closely involved in this project. Has moved from Parks Department, but we were really fortunate. He moved within the city, and he's now continuing his professional contributions with Olson Associates. Since I think the beginning of the award, or very early in the award program, PAL is also honored as the great commoner, someone with special contributions to preservation education, because PAL has put an emphasis, and I think an unbroken record of providing these brown bag presentations monthly for 27 years. That's a lot of months. It's also supported lots of other kinds and recognized lots of other kinds of preservation education. And this year recognized a real pioneer and stalwart in preservation education, Keith Sawyers. Keith was a professor at the University of Nebraska in the architecture program for 43 years, full professor for 23 of those. These are the things that those of us in the field can't quite ever get to, but just admire. And then since his retirement, has continued to contribute through volunteer efforts at a very sophisticated level, giving us continuing education on the architectural history of our state. Trying to think of how many generations of architects Keith would have influenced and contributed, because we don't count generations in academia in 20 years, or this would be like 10 generations of architects, 12, 15 generations of architects that he's influenced, and given the message that needs to be given of the built environment as well as the new buildings that make a place worth living in. This is a project that he's been involved in with the Society of Architectural Historians, an online state-by-state understanding of the most important buildings of a place. So the Great Commoner Award this year went to Keith Sawyer, and we were delighted that Keith and his wonderful wife Sharon is also with us at the award presentation and came again today, constituting an important part of our audience. Thank you. So here's Jamie looking good next to the Sawyers, who look like we want to look when we get to that honorable position. PAL is also recognized every year a project that may not be, strictly speaking, a preservation project, but contributes to the vitality of the city, because without a vital city and a vital city core, much of what we celebrate and enjoy and try to preserve has no chance. We don't preserve these as museums. We preserve a city as a place to live and enjoy. And one of the needs that was always cited was, where do people who live downtown get their groceries? And the answer was, probably the same place you get your groceries. You get in a car and drive to a grocery store. One of what you hope for in a city setting, and especially a downtown setting, is that there's some opportunity for people who live downtown to enjoy all of their aspects of life in that setting. It's one of the purposes of a city, and that question is beginning to be answered in a different way than we could before. Early on, there were grocery stores scattered all through the community, in every neighborhood, and often the front room of a little house. There were downtown grocery stores, but not for many decades until a project at the corner of Canopy Street and N Street called Canopy Street Markets, in this residential building with retail on the first floor, opened as Canopy Street Markets. And it is not a huge grocery store, but it is a genuine, real, full-service grocery store with real food, beautiful presentation, very talented operator, experienced operator, with good support from her business partners and from the developers of the building, who are very eager to get this use right down in the Haymarket downtown area. All kinds of the needs of the residents can be met, including real, genuine, beautiful fruits and vegetables, meat, and all the things of life. So the City Center Award, recognizing that support of the vitality of the urban core, went to Canopy Street Market, and we were honored to have the business owners, Jill Moline, who is the very experienced grocery operator, Mark Whitehead, more often thought of as a gas station owner, but also gas stations today are becoming little convenience stores, and he had a interest in stretching that into more of a full-service grocery store, and partnered with Jill, the experienced operator of grocery stores, and then the property developer, Speedway Properties, and both Craig and Clay Smith came representing themselves, Speedway Properties, and their partner, Nelnet. It's great fun at these events to have and see the people who do these projects coming to meet the people who appreciate these projects, and PAL has done a great job with that. This is a before picture. This is not an after picture. This is a before picture of the intersection of 19th Street and N Street, and that area that we're beginning to see develop between core traditional downtown, reaching maybe to 16th and 17th, and the eastern edge, which is starting to revitalize as what calls itself the Telegraph District, has seen a lot of transformation. And a couple of years ago, PAL recognized with this same kind of award the Assemblage and Constellation Studio projects, two wonderful art projects in that same key zone between east of Antelope Valley Parkway and west of Antelope Valley Parkway, east of downtown proper. And that connective portion is coming alive in just a lovely way. And it's often the historic buildings that are first there and able to support those new uses. We'll see new buildings in Telegraph District along with some older buildings, but in between, some of these small buildings are contributing the most interesting uses. The building on the right, the commercial building, had been used for years as a formal wear shop. The other one we're recognizing in a pairing like Assemblage and Constellation of a few years ago was an automotive building back a couple blocks further west. In its last use was an auto body shop. It now is Lincoln's Cidery. SARO CIDER operates there at the corner of 18th and N Streets. I love that it's a bicycle connected area. These businesses are both on the N Street bikeway, and there's a bike station and bike hoops and all throughout this area. There's SARO in the background. And looking down east on N Street, down the hill, On the right edge, we see Code Brewing Company, another of Lincoln's proliferation and exciting growth of craft breweries, a little tap room and brewery here, right at the corner of Ann and Antelope Valley Parkway. And so PAL embraced both of those projects as advances in the development of downtown and the real connection of the urban uses, both supporting and supported by the bikeway as well. And again, we were honored to have representatives of both companies, Adam Holmberg and Matt Goring from the Code Brewing on the left, and there our own Jamie Tallman in the middle, and then Tracy Sanford and Matt Wood from the CIDER attending to receive PAL's recognition for making us a more interesting, more fun, more vital, more alive city. And it's great to see PAL, which is about historic preservation, and the first word there is historic, but these new uses also are very significant in how we live in and enjoy a city. Jamie gets the opportunity as PAL president to choose one of the awards himself, the President's Award, and he's been involved in the exciting new projects at the Lincoln Children's Zoo on their board. And we have there lots of new construction, lots of later buildings, but right on the 27th Street face of the Children's Zoo, a wonderful 1936 building, Davis and Wilson design, WPA project, using even the local Lancaster County limestone. This must have been the last building quality limestone to come out of the quarries in Roca, and created this very handsome design, originally used as the zoo building. This is the Jim Ager building of 1936 in its early pristine form. There are beautiful carved plaques along the front of the various animals, and one of my favorites, this bronze WPA USA 1936 plaque on the corner of the building. It was featured in subsequent postcards as historic buildings. I think the National Register should have a box you check. Are there historic postcards of this building? This one has many. It is designated as a local landmark through the efforts of the Park Department and their lease arrangement with the Children's Zoo. Children's Zoo will bring zoo uses back into this building, but under the guiding eye of the Historic Preservation Commission on the exterior of this handsome building. And the inside will again become a zoo building and allow the zoo to operate 12 months of the year. They won't go dark all winter long as they have up to now, but rather we'll have an indoor space and be able to continue offering programs through the winter months. The configuration inside will change, but some of the really neat features of beautiful clerestory windows and light coming down from above will still be there. This is the old cages along the wall, and it'll be a much more dynamic interior as it is redone. Recent view, couldn't quite get the finished view because it wasn't quite finished on the outside, but out where there had been a fountain and a planter, and I put a red star on the building, that circle out in front of the building that will connect the parking areas north and south is the granite ring, or is capped with the granite ring from the fountain that used to be in the intersection of 11th and J Streets, the Thompson Fountain, which is celebrated at that intersection by plaques on the planters around it. But now, instead of being resting in the park's boneyard, those granite elements are back, capping that big circular ring, which will have plantings and modern art in the center of that, celebrating the zoo and giving the zoo a fresh new face on 27th Street. So we were very happy that John Shapo was able to attend as well, the CEO of Lincoln Children's Zoo, and receive President Award from Jamie Tallman. And I love that cornerstone plaque so well, it just had to come back again. And then the Lifetime Achievement Award of PAL, the big one, the Helen Busalis Award, where she gave us the gift of her spectacular name in Lincoln history. And Helen had not only a career as a a civic contributor to Lincoln on city council and then in her 2 terms as mayor, but also was a trustee of the National Trust. We call it the National Trust because it is an organization governed by trustees, and Helen was one of those trustees in her career, and great supporter of historic preservation, and one of the founding catalysts of PAL in calling us up and saying, you really need to create a group. And we would say, well, Helen, I'm the city guy, that will be a citizen group. And she said, you really need to help create a group. And if you knew Helen, you didn't tell her no very many times without realizing you had only one possible answer, and that was to say yes. And with some of you and members who are still original founders of PAL, we had to create that group, called it PAL, and here we are 27 years later, still using her good name. One of those heroes through many, many years of PAL's existence, consistent board member, cheerleader, drum major for all efforts, was our good friend. Who will recognize as I sneak up on him at one of his favorite buildings, which was Whittier. Doug Beals, our good friend who also left us in the last year. Doug was a great supporter while working for the university for the beauty of Whittier, and it wasn't just Whittier, but really a whole city, but he was a key proponent for this was a building far too good to use, far too good to waste. And I think Whittier had kind of a special place sitting there unused, that it was something unhealthy on the community spirit of Lincoln. And the university finding its use, reinstalling itself, putting vibrant uses. When the lights come on at Whittier at night, we're just a healthier city than when no lights came on at Whittier. Beautiful restoration, rehab, adaptive reuse was done, putting this spectacular building back in use. And here's Doug inviting us inside Whittier, and it's building that more symbolic. He was a key proponent, but his service to PAL went far beyond Whittier. We were honored that Lori, Doug's widow, came to our presentation, and I was honored to be able to read her statement back to PAL, expressing Doug's appreciation of PAL, the efforts of PAL, the excitement that it added. He added to our lives, and it added to his. And Jamie presented Lori the Helen Busalis Award, richly deserved by Doug, and I think much appreciated by Lori and the family. And it was a very special note at our meeting. And that's what we did a few months ago. And I think continuing a important community tradition. And we'll see that we don't so much in PAL honor buildings, we honor people, and who through their work on buildings and places and the spirit of the city contribute to the livability and the excitement of the place we call home in Lincoln and Lancaster County. That's what I brought for you today. If you have questions, I would answer them. You can't challenge any of these awards. They've already been presented. We never take them back. I see a question here from, it looks like Wayne Bowles.
Did you say that the building that kept growing eventually became the Hardy building?
The building that I started, the question was that building I showed in the Jim CARUSO presentation. The Hardy building up at 8th and R Street started as a 3-story and then had 3 more added on top. You kind of see it in even the paint jobs today. You see the concrete frame only on the lower 3 stories. It has the same kind of construction above, but they clad it entirely in brick on the upper stories. And that's why it's got a little bit of that kind of wedding or layer cake appearance, of the lower three having a different appearance than the top three. About half a dozen of Haymarket's buildings grew vertically. And I puzzled about that for years, and I think a lot of it was because the area was so railroad dependent. When you had a spur track, you went up, you didn't spread out and block your railroad access.
So there were three different companies over time that owned it.
Well, were there different companies in different parts of the building? I don't think so. I think it was more, there may have been multiple tenants at various times, but it started as Western Paint and Fur, which was Thomas P. Kennard's company. Then about 10 years after it was built, gained the upper floors and was used principally by Hardie Furniture. And then World War II, it was one of the several manufacturing plants in Lancaster County of war materials, and I think they made signal equipment for Western Electric in that building. Then it was back to warehouse use. Then it was back to Pigeon Hotel. Now people live there. Local chapter of the AIA has its offices on the first floor. Haymarket Haymarket Development Corporation has their office in the building, some other ground floor tenants, and then I think 60 apartment units above. So very significant building in the history of Haymarket, as well as nice architectural work, and great to have it back in use.
And what year was that rehab?
Roxanne asks what year was the rehab of the Hardie building. I think it was late 80s that was underway. It was one of the early efforts of Lincoln Development Corporation, kind of the business group, volunteer business group, spun off a subsidiary of the Lincoln Haymarket Housing Corporation that did both Hardie and Grainger. Hardie first and Grainger second. It was about late 80s, early 90s, and then mid 90s for the Grainger. That same group still exists, operates those two buildings, and will contribute a portion, they'll operate a portion of a new building being built just south of O Street on Canopy. It'll be the O to N on Canopy Street on the west side. It'll be a Speedway Properties is doing most of the building, but the Lincoln Haymarket Housing will do another, I think, 50 or 60 affordable units in that building, continuing to meet the mixed housing needs downtown. That'll be new built, but the group that cut its teeth and has done a great job on those two historic buildings.
And didn't Mr. Hardie become mayor?
And Mr. Bowles has another question about Hardie. Did Mr. Hardie get taller when you added the second story? No, that wasn't his question. Was Hardie a mayor of Lincoln? Yes, one of the Hardie brothers was a mayor of Lincoln. Built some beautiful houses down in what's called Calvert Place, right where Sheridan turns into Calvert, and Ferdinand Fisk designed those. And I knew you were going to follow up with who designed the Hardie houses in Calvert Place, so tried to jump ahead of you there, Wayne. Eileen.
Can you tell us about what year PAL started, and did they do the awards right away? And the brown bags started right away too, right?
I have to try to do the math of when it started, because 27 from 200 and 2019 would be 1992.
That's what I'm thinking.
And PAL really started, in effect, with the brown bags, because I was sort of charged by Helen with get something going, and tried to think of what tools I had. I really admired in some of my Boston time some of the groups there that led walking tours and neighborhood tours, and it seemed to me that if you start a preservation group around a battle about a single building, you win or lose that battle, but you often lose the organization at the end of that. If you could start a preservation group around, could we get together and enjoy ourselves about things we want to learn about and we would enjoy, the tours, the walks, and the talks, we might create a more sustainable organization that would engage in the struggles along the way, but also might be more durable. And so I can't remember if we met in this same hall at the Historical Society. I know we were meeting here very early, but I got some postcard stamps and sent out postcards to everybody I could think of and said, would you like to come hear a talk? And a nice number of people came, and at the end of that I said, would you like to do this again? I can't afford all the stamps myself. One of my wonderful student volunteers bought the second sheet of postcard stamps, Marion Oftenbergy, and after we'd had a couple of talks, we started, PAL organized formally and adopted the monthly talks as a key purpose, which you've then operated for years, finding folks who will come and talk. And I think that's been a sustaining key element. And the community knows us better from these, and once we could have them on government access television beyond the attendance at these events, PAL was a real entity and remains, I think, a key part of the community. So we go back to the early 90s.
And so then the awards happened the first year? I didn't remember
I think maybe we were doing awards by the end of the first year, because it was part of the, we should have fun. We should get together and enjoy. We were often meeting in the courtroom of the old Fed, now the Grand Manse, and that was kind of a key starting point. And that was just a fun room to be in, and then to see it rehabbed. When the windows reopened and the drop ceiling came off, that was a big wow, and a continuing wow. Beautiful room. I think that's probably about as much as we will offer today, but I appreciate you being here, and the questions especially appreciate, even yours, Wayne. Thank you.